a new teaser trailer has just been released for Masters of the Air. Now, this is made by the same people who did Band of Brothers, The Pacific, Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg as production companies behind it, and a lot of the same writers. So this should be a really good series, just like those other two series are. So I'm excited to dig into this trailer and give you my reactions as we move along. Give it a quick watch because it just came out. So I'll give some thoughts on it as we're moving along and kind of a quick wrap up when we're finished. So let's get into it.
Let's rack them up and knock them down. When you look at it, you don't pay attention to what's really going on. It's kind of beautiful.
There's a production team.
We came from every corner of the country with a common purpose. Go, 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 go! To bring the war to Hitler's doorstep.
These daylight missions. It's so sad.
So that's the first thing I want to talk about here is the daylight missions that were done by the United States Army Air Force. That was in contrast to what Bomber Command of the British Commonwealth did. The British Commonwealth bomber squadrons attacked at night, thinking that that would provide them better cover for their missions. Of course, it made issues of aiming even more difficult than they would be during the day, which also during the day they were not extremely accurate either. That was a major issue with the Allied air forces in the Second World War, was issues of accuracy, and that goes on for quite a long time, the entirety of the war pretty much, and this is why the campaign develops the way it does. So talking about that in the series will be very interesting. It's good that's included in the teaser. Of course, it's a bit of a post facto thing. Of course, they would learn that lesson very quickly, that the missions at daytime are extremely dangerous. I mean, it's pretty much common sense, but they thought they could do a better job also with the bombing, which is not true, and it didn't work out that way. Lots of work has been done previously on the bombing and its effectiveness by the Air Force itself in the aftermath of the war, and the results were not good. Also, it's showing here a bit of the tactics and how this is done. I mean, the shots of the bomber streams are going to be, if done well, and it looks like they are going to be just spectacular. And I don't mean that in a rah-rah kind of way. I mean that in the literal definition of it. These things were massive, lots of bombers. I mean, Bomber Command did do several thousand bomber raids. So there's going to be so many bombers in these streams. And as we'll move through, we'll see some other things and how the tactics kind of develop.
And watch the move. We lead our boys through it.
So just again, real quick there, of course, there's lots of casualties and them being brought back in. I mean, many of these bombers take substantial, heavy damage. The B-17, which is called the Flying Fortress for a reason, could take a punishment in the air and still be able to fly and land. So a lot of the aviators who are wounded come back, and unfortunately, a large number of them die and are buried in Britain, which is, again, part of this. I assume it's going to come up as well. Issues and connections and relationships, and I'll leave it at that, with local people near these airfields. I hope that comes up as well. I think that'll be a really, really interesting part of all of this if they do it, which I'm assuming they will, because how could they not? Frame here is the bomb damage that you see. Hopefully this doesn't get it tagged for censorship. So it's obviously not real. It's from a film series, so this isn't real footage of bomb damage done to somewhere in Britain, maybe London. I don't know. Soldier on leave. Who knows? I think that's really good to include in this because it still goes on, right? There's things like bombers getting through. It's not like at the height of the Blitz, right? When America's not fully involved in the war yet at all, or even at all officially. But there's still things going on later, and then you have the vengeance weapons, as they're called, V1 and V2s that are launched on London and other parts of Britain very much later in the war, after the D-Day landings. So I don't know what we'll be seeing here, but it's good to include it because that's obviously a major element of the war for Britain and what's going on. The civilians are on the front line, both sides, clearly, that you can see in the series, because they're going to be hitting the German industrial centers, but are also literally cities. So there's civilians everywhere. And of course, that is hugely controversial and a bit murky when it comes to morality of war. And I'm sure that will be touched on in numerous ways. Of course, a lot of these aviators are shot down and do survive, right? A lot of them become prisoners of war. We know things like the Great Escape, all that kind of stuff, right? A lot of American aviators are shot down and end up in POW camps. Looks like one of these aviators ends up fighting some Germans, maybe has a connection to a civilian, because as you can see, there's a German soldier going by. Maybe there's a connection to the resistance, which did happen. There's all kinds of stories and experiences of those who are shot down across the Allied air forces, serving with resistance members, short periods for the duration of the war. Happened quite frequently, actually. So it looks like maybe some of that will work its way in. So many fascinating stories that I've read and come across in my research on particularly British Commonwealth, obviously Canadian experiences. Of course, this is going to be focusing on the Americans, and also one of the American groups here shown is obviously the Red Tails there, of African Americans serving in fighter planes and protecting these bomber streams. Now, of course, that comes later, with the Mustang and things like drop tanks, so they can have more fuel, so they can go further into enemy territory. We saw at the beginning there where the fighters are coming in, and then the bombers appear to be on their own, because at first they thought it was going to be enough to have these bombers loaded up with their own machine guns to take on the fighters. Obviously, with the casualties mounting and the damage done to the bombers, that was not the case. So they had to change tactics, right? That's going back to flying during the day. That's going to be problematic. And then, of course, if you don't have fighter protection, all the more problematic, right? With anti-aircraft fire, and then added to the German increasing sophistication and technologies with radar and anti-aircraft defenses and connections to stations all across parts of Europe that rely on these radar stations to intercept these bomber streams. I know some people have wanted to see kind of that development of difficulties at the beginning, like Casualties, issues of daylight bombing. And as they move through and they learn lessons, right, that's going to mean that the casualties are taken and there's loss and all that stuff, that nastiness, as I say, the nasty business of war. Moving along, hopefully it's not just, this is all good to go and we know what we're doing, but, people still die. It would be really interesting to see a change in tactics, a change in development of technology, a change in thinking. I think that would be really fascinating to see.
We're getting through this. Even if the odds are
fighting on the ground, which again had to happen. There's all kinds of crazy stories of these shot down aviators, mostly doing evasion, right? They're not really primed for hand-to-hand combat. Again, I can't speak 100% to the Americans, but I know in British Commonwealth, they're not trained to fight in hand-to-hand combat. That doesn't exist. They're trained up to do their specific role within the bomber. They're not given hand-to-hand combat training. Maybe they did some, boxing or wrestling or who knows what before. But again, they have to add in some drama, and I get that. And I want to talk about that real quick in a minute. But, they're not trained to do these things. And why would you expect them to be? So it'll be interesting to see how that goes, what that looks like. But they were kind of trained, not very much, to do things like evasion, which was most important, right? Things like dumping the uniform, dumping the parachute if it's nearby you, because the Germans would know something's up, right? They know these planes are coming down because they did it. So they can sort of figure out the area. And then if there's clues like uniforms and parachutes, things like that, that gives a clue to who's nearby. So there's all stories of them, burying these things, getting rid of them, making contacts with civilians, which in and of itself, and maybe this will come up as well, was incredibly dangerous. You never know who you were talking to or what their leanings were, right? They could be a member of, if they're in France, the Maquis, or wherever, Netherlands, part of the Dutch resistance, or they could be a collaborator, or they could be just someone in that moment who sees an opportunity to turn over an Allied aviator and get paid by the Germans, which happened a lot. You don't know. So you're really taking your life in your own hands again. You face the danger of the German anti-aircraft fire, the night fighters, or the day fighters for the Americans. And then on the ground, you may have survived all of that without a scratch. But then you come to the ground, and maybe that first civilian you meet and you think is going to help you, and you end up in a POW camp, or sometimes even worse, which did happen as well. I don't know about this specific group. So this is the 100th bomb group, it's the Bloody 100th. I think that gives a bit of an indication there. I'm not going to talk about that too much right now, maybe later in the future if there's interest, but I know there are other experts on that particular bomb group and their war. Again, my research and experience lies with the British Commonwealth and particularly number 6 group, which is the RCAF group, and all those squadrons. So a lot of that, my experience comes from there, but a lot of this carries over, and a lot of it is similar, particularly the German reactions, right? It's going to be similar to it is in the day as it is at night, and there's interactions as well with British or Canadian or Australian, New Zealanders, South Africans coming in contact with the Americans as well, because they get shot down. They end up in the same places. I mean, tons of stories I've read of, people moving through different houses, different civilians, and then, they meet an American, and then they stick together as they move through to different places, and hopefully they can get out. A lot of them trying to get to neutral places like Spain. Some just hid in place a lot until the area was liberated. You see that a lot post June 6, 1944, obviously, with the stay in place. Hopefully the Allies will come soon and liberate the area so you can get back, and a lot of them did. So we'll see, but it'll be interesting that they're including the ground element that happens to some of these guys.
First time in the Sawmill, boys.
So these shots are spectacular already. I mean, I can't wait to watch it. I'm just watching on my external monitor here, but I can't wait to watch this on a big TV with the HD and everything. And it should be really, really interesting to see these shots, because again, there are photos and stuff, but they can only capture a small amount, right? They're not always sending up another bomber to take these footage of this stuff, particularly with HD and color, right? That wasn't really a thing.
Let's rack them up and knock them down.
So real quick as well, that scene there, it looks like they're going to make it kind of action-y. And again, I'm not blaming them, especially for a teaser, right? You got to get people interested, particularly historical topics. You got to make it interesting. I get that. I do, particularly being a history YouTuber. So yeah, of course, they're going to include some action there to wrap up the trailer. But again, yeah, it did happen a lot. These gunners also scored a lot of kills on German fighters. So we'll probably see quite a bit of that, and the intensity of it. Hopefully, again, they show the learning curve, but we'll see. Very well done. I mean, I said earlier in Band of Brothers, the Pacific, those were extremely well done. Of course, they have the little things that are wrong, down to, what the rivet counting, as it's called in the historical community, of, they had this wrong bayonet or this wrong thing. Of course, that's going to happen. That happens in every historical series, documentary, with, recreations. That happens. Not a big deal. To me, to some others, is a big deal. Not too worried about that. The only thing that I am concerned about, and it's not even necessarily something coming from the filmmakers themselves, producers, any of that, is hopefully it's not presented as the Americans doing this first, right? At the beginning of the trailer, talking about bringing the war to Hitler's doorstep, right? That had been done right off the beginning, right? They're hitting naval vessels the day of war being declared in 1939. So hopefully they talk about that. It would be great to see that as well. They don't necessarily have to focus on it even for very long. Just, if there's some cross-pollination there with British Commonwealth, something that would be cool, just because the British Commonwealth had been doing this from the beginning. in terms of that learning curve. That's something that obviously, as a historian, that interests me, and it would be great to see something like that done here. So again, it looks really like it's going to be a good series, and I'm excited for it. I'm going to be getting Apple TV for it. I don't have Apple TV currently, but it's going to be something really, really, really interesting to watch. And I am not going to lie, I say I am excited. Yeah, I'm excited to see what goes on with this and the reactions to it, and your reactions to it. If you think you're excited for this, please let me know. And you know what you want to see. And if you've read the book, it is based off a book, just like the previous series were also. So if you've read the book, please let me know. I haven't read it myself. If you think it's worth reading, please tell me and I will do it. It is one I've been looking at reading anyway, just because like I said, I do a lot of Commonwealth. So wanting to read this is something that interests me, and another way of examining something I think I know a little bit about. You know, I've been doing quite a bit of research, particularly lately on air forces. So something that's really, really become a passion of mine is these bomber crews. So it's something I'm really interested in. So if you're new to the channel, because coming here for this reaction, please subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot. And like the video, and leave a comment down below about what your thoughts are on this trailer or the series coming up or the book or whatever. I want to hear what your opinion is on all of this. So we'll talk about it a bit more in January. Hopefully more details come out as we move along into the new year.